Welcome back, listeners. Benvenuti to the Anglo-Italian Connection Football Podcast. As always, I'm Tommaso Adami, and you can find us on Instagram at Anglo-Italian Pod. I think Inter Milan have got a shot. You're an idiot. All right.
And as always, I'm Ruairi Criscuolo. You can follow us on Twitter at Italian Anglo Pod. I'm just reminding Tommy there, early doors. And I learned how to clip audio this week. So that's good.
That's great. So this was the surprise that you had for me?
That's a surprise. When you were half an hour late, I was like, yes, I can clip the audio. Just give me half an hour. I need to find it. Yeah,
great.
Yeah.
So in case you're a new listener to our pod, on the day that the Champions League group stages, the Champions League groups were drawn, Rory and I were together because it was back during non-lockdown days. We were drinking beers, and I felt very excited. And also 2 months before, we had walked all over Shakhtar, winning 5-0 in the semi-final of the Europa League. And I was thrilled by the fact that Real Madrid was in our same group. And I think maybe the booze, maybe the excitement, they made me say that I thought that Inter Milan would have a shot at winning the Champions League. I did say that. How stupid it sounds now.
I also got a message from my cousin last night who said, send my thoughts out to Tommy. Inter winning the Champions League. I've never heard such twaddle, but send my thoughts out to him. So thanks for the message, Chris. I've officially passed on your message.
Thank you, Leroy, who revived the group, a WhatsApp group where no one had been writing for ages. He sent the clipped audio as well, and he said, Tommaso, how are you feeling? It allowed for great banter against your friend, Tommaso. And but look at me. I'm wearing an Inter shirt. I'm representing my team. I'm feeling good. Repping. And this week's episode features two guests, one calling from the United States to talk everything Man U related. Spoiler alert, it looks grim. And then we also have another guest that we're very excited about, calling from England and ready to discuss everything Inter related.
Yeah, this is a guy we've kind of been interacting with on Twitter for a while. Uncle Sharms, I think it's at R Sharms with 3 Zs, I think.
And he looks like Achraf Hakimi from Inter Milan. Yeah,
great guy. He does look like him, yeah. I thought his photo was like, when they pick a footballer's photo. But yeah, we're excited to have him on. He does YouTube. He does live watch-alongs for the Inter games. He's a big Inter Twitter guy, so it'll be interesting to hear him and Tommy kind of both moan about what happened this week.
But before we delve into all the things that we have for you today, including our usual quiz time lineup that today will be before the Euroreview, we have to mention that 2020 has struck yet again and taken another footballing legend away from us. We're talking, of course, about Paolo, nicknamed Pablito Rossi, who just passed away. He was 64 years old. Too early for a legend, just like Maradona, to leave. This guy became the symbol of the 1982 World Cup for Italians. He was the top goal scorer. He was not supposed to be called up for the national team because he was involved in a game-fixing scandal. So he was banned for 2 years and eventually got called up, and he resulted crucial in that World Cup. Very similar setting to the 2006 World Cup. But besides that, Pablito Rossi also won 2 Serie B titles, 2 Serie A titles. He was the top goal scorer in Serie A for 2 different seasons. He won the Ballon d'Or in 1982. And his face is the symbol to Italians of the 1982 Mundial.
Yeah, well, exactly. I remember growing up, my dad always used to tell me about that final in 1982. He remembers watching it and being the only, in quotes, Italian in the room. I'm really obviously really enjoying that win, but he said he always talked about Paolo Rossi as the symbol. He, of course, scored in the final, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, he did.
Yeah, and he was always a player that my dad would tell me about when I was growing up. I woke up to the news this morning on that. Like, as I was eating my breakfast, I was like, oh, God, another one. Like, and 62 is, like, crazy young, right? So it's, awful again to hear.
64, I got messages from my mom. My mom and my dad both feeling pretty shocked because for them, when my mom was born in 60, so 22 years old when Italy won the World Cup. My dad was only 1 year younger than him, so 25 when Italy won the World Cup. He became a symbol to that, and I always looked at Paolo Rossi when I was a kid and compared him to how footballers looked. He was like the skinny, old school striker, and that's something that I've always appreciated about him. Also, when you see his goals, he's more technical than Inzaghi, but he's the same like type of very versatile player who will just bag any goal that any ball that comes in the box.
Yeah, exactly. He seemed like the videos I've seen of him, he was very much like a poacher, but he knew like the right place to be, the right time. And yeah, I think he was the top goal scorer in 1982 World Cup, of course. I think, of course, he became the symbol of it. And that is regarded as one of the greatest finals of all time as well, that Italy won there.
So rest in peace, Paolo. 2020 was not fair to many top athletes. Kobe Bryant, Diego Armando Maradona, now Paolo Rossi.
Please no more.
Please no more. We hope that you all can catch up there, maybe play a game of football together, and we'll be rewatching the 1982 final thinking about you. But I guess now it's time for our time lineup. Rory, you looked very, very mysterious when you were preparing the questions, weren't you?
Yeah, I was trying to find a theme. I think I was making it too difficult for myself, but I think I found a theme that we can work with and a game that you should be able to guess. Hopefully not too well, though. But anyway, let's get me out of this mess and into the quiz, please. Welcome, listeners. It's that time of the week again. It is the time lineup quiz. So for any new listeners we might have, it's a bit complicated, but you will get it in the end, I promise. So I am going to give Tommy 4 events in football history that he is going to try and put into chronological order. Once he has put them into an order, I am then going to get him to pick or guess one of the teams from a match that is featured in the events. Every week, I think the explanation gets less and less clear. But anyway, you'll pick it up as we go along. Tommy, how are you feeling? Have you been revising?
Contrarily to you, I feel like I have things like in a timeline in my head, more or less. So I feel pretty confident at this game. So yeah.
This quiz definitely isn't my strong point. I'm terrible at remembering time.
But also I tend to be very cocky before any competition, and then I usually shit the bed, but we shall see this time.
Talking of cocky,
I think Inter Milan have got a shot. You're an idiot.
Good. So moving on, we're going to go to the quiz. So Tommy, the 4 events that we have are, have you got it on paper?
Dude, I told you, I've got a big brain that takes notes of everything I hear. I'm ready.
So, first event is Paul Ince leaves Inter Milan.
Fuck. Okay, number 2?
The first Italian plays in the Premier League.
Dude.
In the Premier League, not in England, in the Premier League.
Okay.
Arsenal beat Parma 1-0 in the Cup Winners' Cup final.
Okay.
And the first Italian to manage in the Premier League.
Wow, Rory. You got really pissed off because you got more points than you, didn't you?
I feel like you've been setting them really hard and I did them quite easy, so I'm having my revenge. But there's kind of like 2 parts to this quiz because you have to figure out who it is and then when it was. But in the second part, I can give you the names if you are struggling, I think.
Yeah, all right. So the only thing that comes to my mind right now is the time where these 4 events could have happened. And I want to say that the earliest of these events was probably 1992, and the latest one of these events was probably 1998. I need to think when the Premier League started with the current format. As you know, the Premier League hasn't always existed. This is a new format that came on at the end of the 90s, I want to believe. So the first Italian manager there, I'll have a thought about it. I want to say that the earliest event is leaving Inter Milan, possibly 1992, 1994, around then. But I would jump into the Euroreview, and then I'll have some time to think about it. Very hard quiz, Rory, but I like it.
I feel like maybe it's a bit too hard, but I don't know. Deal with it. Right, are we ready?
Yeah, repeat just the 4 events very quickly for our listeners.
The first Italian to play in the Premier League, Paul Ince leaving Inter Milan, Arsenal beating Parma 1-0 in the Cup Winners' Cup final, and the first Italian to manage in the Premier League.
All right. Very tough. I like challenges. I'll be thinking about it. But now it's time for our Euroreview. And welcome to our Euro Review. We're very excited to talk everything Champions League, Serie and Premier League related. So we're going to take a look at the last teams to qualify in the Champions League, and then we will have our guests, Bryce from Minneapolis and our friend Uncle Sharms from England. So we're really going to talk a lot about Manchester United and Inter, but before that, we're going to talk about the other teams that have qualified just in the nick of time. However, before breaking it down, we would like to bring to your attention a very good and interesting, however, very sad article written by Miguel Delaney for The Independent, whose title is Like Being in a Fairy Tale, The Lost Wonder of the Champions League Group Stages.
Yeah, so last week we were talking about how actually the group seemed quite open. And since reading this article, it seems that it's open for nowadays, but compared to maybe 10, 15 years ago, the group stages used to be a lot more close affairs, a lot tenser, and there used to be a lot more tricky away ties, right? So I think he was talking mainly about the Rosenborg team who knocked out AC Milan. And the team that I remember more than any of the others is the Dinamo Kiev team, who beat Barcelona 4-0 at Camp Nou, right? And he points out in the article that Shevchenko had 2 full seasons at Dinamo Kiev in the Champions League before he moved on. And this was kind of the point he was making, that those teams had more time to keep hold of their squads. They had more time to build teams and become competitive. Whereas now, as we see, teenagers are poached at 16, 17, and these smaller clubs don't have a chance to develop and play with these players. There's not really anything to be said in terms of what we can do about it or what can change.
It's just like that at this point.
Yeah, it's like it was just saying how the game has changed. It just made me quite sad because I do remember and I'm sure it's the same for you, but growing up watching the Champions League and being surprised by the teams like Dinamo Kiev or Rosenborg or Nantes or whoever it was, being like, oh, I've never heard of them, but bloody hell, these are good, right? And that very rarely happens now in the Champions League. Obviously, we have Atalanta, but people knew how good they were. It's not as big a surprise as like Dinamo Kiev.
I totally agree with you. And just like you said, unfortunately, there is no solution to the problem because we're way too far into it. The big problem that is mentioned in the article too is the wages and the money that is involved. Of course, money has sort of favored bigger clubs, and the smaller clubs right now don't really have a saying in the Champions League, which is a shame because a team like Ludogorets, if they qualify for the Champions League, they should be able to dream just like all the other teams. Unfortunately, this is the reality. Maybe, Rory, I don't know what you think about that. That calls for some changes in the way the Champions League is structured at the moment.
Well, I think they're constantly looking at ways to restructure it. We've seen it with, as we've talked about before, the European Super League is basically a replacement for the Champions League that they're lining up. So I think there is going to be a change in structure. Obviously, the big boys don't want the teams to be competitive anymore. Like for me, in a perfect world, I would have the Champions League go back to the European Cup format and just be straight knockout because I find it so much more entertaining. When you go back and look at the old European Cup and it was Real Madrid being knocked out by like a Hungarian team you've never heard of, it seems a bit more entertaining, but those days are gone and the big boys aren't now going to vote for anything that makes or aren't going to allow anything that makes it more competitive for the smaller teams. I don't know how you'd restructure it. I don't know. I honestly don't know.
Yeah, I don't know either. All I know is that it's true. Like I had been looking at the groups without really thinking about it, seeing teams that had 15 points and teams that had 1. Yeah. And I wasn't really thinking about it. And then I read this article and it confirmed that it's not always been like that. It used to be something very different back in the day. And I guess that back in the day, Inter not making it to the round of 16 with this specific group the news wouldn't be as big as it is now. However, I do understand why it is big news still.
And that was one of the closer groups that you were in, right? That wasn't a group that was like, there was a whipping boy. That was like one of the closest groups.
Exactly. So Group B and Group H, that's why we kind of decided to break them down thoroughly with an Inter fan and a Manchester United fan, because they were the only two old school groups where craziness happened, especially in the Inter Milan group. Like Shakhtar beats twice Real Madrid, but they never managed to score against Inter. Inter don't manage to win against them. So it was very interesting, and it felt like a real competition. And